Hello, and welcome to Perspectivas Latinas, a community service of CAN TV. I'm your host, Juan Carlos Hernandez. Since 1996, April has been the month to celebrate poetry across the United States. The Academy of American Poets created the celebration in an effort to increase awareness and appreciation of poetry, and it has inspired similar celebrations in Great Britain and Canada. Here in Chicago, the Latino community has made it a celebration very much its own. This year, Contratiempo Magazine and DePaul University will present the 6th Annual Latino Poetry Festival, spotlighting local and international award-winning poets. The theme of this year's festival is the 5 senses. And here to discuss the events and the poets are Gerardo Cárdenas, director and writer of Contratiempo, Moira Pujols, an executive director of Contratiempo, and Rey Andújar, a poet from the Dominican Republic. How did you become part of this festival? How did you get wrapped up in this energy and in this vibe of poetry?
Well, I think each one of us has different stories as to our own personal involvement, but collectively it stems from a dual celebration a few years back when Contratiempo, our magazine, was celebrating its 5th year, and DePaul University was celebrating the 10th year of the magazine for their Center for Latino Research, Diálogos.
Okay.
And along with Juana Iris Gergen, who's a Puerto Rican poet and also a professor at DePaul, we look at the possibility of creating a festival, a poetry festival in Spanish, because there was nothing of that kind in the Midwest. There were in other parts of the United States, but not here. So that's where it all comes from.
That's how you got involved.
Well, I got involved a little bit later on,
Okay.
but it was clear that this was going to be one of the most important initiatives for Contratiempo to bring into focus the burgeoning literary movement in Spanish that is happening in the city of Chicago and has been happening for a while.
Okay. Moira, how did you get wrapped up in this world of the festival?
Well, it happened at that time when we were celebrating those anniversaries, and Juana Gorgen and myself had been talking about bringing that experience of a poetry festival to Chicago and how wonderful it would be to fill the streets of Chicago with poetry. Eventually we would hope to fill the streets. For now, we're happy to have collaborated and continue to add other organizations collaborating with us, and it's been growing every year. So it was born at that time as a co-presentation of Contratiempo and DePaul University, and it has grown now to include other universities such as University of Illinois at Chicago, Northeastern Illinois University, community organizations such as Calles y Sueños in Pilsen, and as well as the Poetry Foundation, who for the first time last year collaborated with us hosting one of the events.
How did that collaboration with the Poetry Foundation come about? Did they approach you? Did they see just the burgeoning growth of Spanish poetry in the city, or did you approach them?
We approached them. We went to visit the year before, and we had wanted to collaborate somehow, and we presented the idea to them to host one of the events of Poesía en Abril. They were very happy to hear that we wanted to collaborate and had wanted to present poetry in Spanish in Chicago, and found that Contratiempo was the perfect partner to do that with. This year is our 2nd year collaborating with them. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to have the stage of the Poetry Foundation to showcase the wonderful talent that there is among the immigrant population here that writes in Spanish. We have so much talent that would not have that platform were it not for the festival and our association with other organizations that want to find all the talent. And we happened to know a lot of people, a lot of poets who really deserved to have that platform. This year, actually, we added the Institute for Puerto Rican Arts and Culture in Humboldt Park.
It's exciting.
That is very exciting. We have a very strong presence in neighborhoods such as Pilsen, which is our where our offices are, and
Contratiempo's offices.
Contratiempo's offices, yes. And so we wanted to have more of a close encounter with the Logan Square, the Humboldt Park community, and they have been a wonderful, wonderful addition to the Poetry Festival.
So it's bringing those immigrant voices, and probably voices that are 2 or 3 generations old, right? But in Spanish. And you also brought today one of the newer voices, immigrant voices, right? Rey Andújar, one of the poets that has become involved with the Poetry Festival. How did you get wrapped up in this?
Well, this is my second year working at the festival. Even though I am part of the board of Contratiempo Magazine, and mostly what I write for the magazine is book reviews and opinions sometimes. And what I've published so far is fiction and poetry. So I always find kind of unfair that I'm always mixed with poets, or they call me poet because I don't consider myself one. But I started collaborating with the festival precisely last year at the Poetry Foundation. I worked there as a performer. I had the opportunity to dance there, and they have a beautiful dry garden area. And that was like the welcome for the event that we had that night. Was one of the biggest events. The 2 poets, Miguel Barnet and Miss Rossetti from Spain, were here. And this year again, I'm participating in the performance part area with Proyecto Theriac, which is a performance unit that involves music, poetry, and dance. So I'm going to be participating in Northeastern Illinois University this year.
Great. How did you make performance part of your poetry, part of your writing?
Well, especially here in Chicago, what happened to me as a writer is at the moment I moved, I mean, you can tell now English is not my first language. Although I've written pieces in English before, and I, work in the city and all that. Spanish for me had more possibilities. There was also, I found myself as a challenge here, just the Spanish for one audience. So I said, maybe the performance, there is an area that I can communicate with a lot of people, do the same poetry, but at the same time, like, I don't have to put it into words, I can show it. And since I've been working with the body for such a long time, like the relations between the body, the movement, and the writing and the literature and language, here was like out of that thing that you at the beginning will think is como un impedimento, like a barrier,
Right.
Like a handicap. I overcome that, and now we are able to present this. And like last year, we came up with this idea of having the dance first, while the people come into the reading for our 2. It was our big event. Our 2 main poets that we invited. Miguel from Cuba and Miss Rossetti from Spain. But this year, Catalina Maria Johnson, which is part of the board and is also involved in the festival, has put together this performance poetry as lineup of artists. So we're gonna have performing our Proyecto Theriac, which is very abstract, but you're also gonna have Febronio Satarain, which is a great Mexican poet, has a great voice and sings. And at the end, we also gonna have some hip hop. So I think it's a pretty good mix. It also shows that poetry is usually associated with being boring. That it's not like that.
Well, it's not necessarily boring, and that's what you're saying actually serves as an entrance into the theme for this year, which is the 5 senses. Gerardo, could you speak a little bit about how that theme came about and why you decided to focus on that theme?
Well, we always try, as we plan for the festival, to look at original ways of thinking about poetry, so that particularly for our audience and for poets, there's always new ways of exploring the poetical phenomenon, if you will.
Right.
So poetry in general is about what you feel, and you feel through the senses. You feel through the things that you see, through the things that you say, through the things that you hear. And poetry in particular is a very physical means of conveying a literary thought. As Ray explained, his poetry can be communicated beyond language through the movement of the body. So it's all about the senses. The senses kind of wrap it all up and allow you to look at poetry maybe to the things that the poetry evokes through the sound, through the breathing of a poem, or maybe through the things that a poem makes you see or makes you remember about it, sensorial experiences. So that's the general idea.
Right.
Last year it was about whispering poetry, which is also a way of bringing the poetry back to the senses, back to the hearing.
Not the auditory sense. Right?
The auditory sense, but there's that you can appreciate poetry even through taste, as we're exploring this year. And many poets have written about the things that they experienced through tasting something. Tasting, we remember Marcel Proust, he remembers something because he's eating a piece of pastry, and that brings back memories. And I think that we want to recreate that.
Moira, could you tell us about some of the events that are going to involve more than just the reading and hearing of poetry, and describe those with some of the specifics of what's going to be happening?
Yes. As Gerardo says, because we have this idea of the senses, the idea is that people have a poetic experience. And to do that, and again, because we have talented performers that can incorporate those other genres of art, such as visual art, such as music, such as performance, we're going to have different ways of experience poetry at different venues. What we're going to do at DePaul University is what you most generally associate with a poetry reading, what you would imagine it to be. We have we have combined at the event both the visiting poets with the local poets. And at DePaul we'll have a reading of both the main poets that we've invited this year, and the equally important other visiting poets and the locals. So that will be a reading on April 11th at the beautiful Cordeleu Commons building at DePaul University in Lincoln Park. On the 12th, we'll move to IPRAC, to the Institute of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture, where we'll have the culinary experience, where we'll have the local poets.
Sounds awesome.
Yes, we have the local poets have created their poetry around the senses. We'll also have with us this year the grandson of Nicolás Guillén, the very important Cuban poet.
Right.
So that night at IPRAC will be kind of a semi-homage to Mr. Guillén, his grandson, who's coming from Cuba.
That's
for
wonderful.
the
I read his name
poetry
in
festival. Yes, he'll be reading his grandfather's poetry, and we'll also have music, which will be those poems from Nicolás Guillén that have been put to song. So you'll be able to enjoy that day. And on the 13th, we'll move to the Poetry Foundation downtown. We will have a choreography, a dance choreographed by Paula Reckman, who is a Mexican choreographer, who will start the evening. And then we will have Juan Carlos Mestre and Coral Bracho read their work together with an audiovisual presentation prepared by Ignacio Guevara, who's also part of Contratiempo. That will be the main event that weekend.
Okay.
We'll also have a diálogo of the poets at the Instituto Cervantes at noon that day, the 13th.
And that diálogo will be for both visiting and local poets?
Yes, this is wonderful. We thought it would, and we started this 2 years ago, and the poets love it. So we bring together a conversation among the poets that are visiting and the local poets. And the audience is welcome. There's limited seating because the idea is that exchange among the poets, but it is open to the public, and you can go to the Instituto Cervantes at 11 o'clock on Saturday. And then on Monday, we have the program at the Northeastern University, where Rey Andújar is performing.
Sounds like a wonderful program. And what's really wonderful is how you're connecting those visiting poets with the local poets.
Yes.
And we have, two local poets here, actually, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to do right now is actually see the reading by these poets that was recorded here in our studio, and we want to share that with our audience now.
Si esa gota se sublevara, dándole significado a este torrente reprimido por rabia, por ingenuidad, por desconocimiento, sembraríamos de espadas las manos tan tranquilas, se plantearía una situación de respeto. Así el enemigo tendría que advertir nuestra presencia, comprenderían que no estamos así de muertos suya, la ofensa suyo, el desorden suya, la desobediencia, si se avecinara el juego de las decapitaciones, si despertáramos a la oportunidad de otro desacato, mejor dicho, al abuso de la estafa comicio tras comicio, se me advierte que tenga más cuidado al hablarles, porque mis palabras podrían ir pretenciosamente encumbradas, pero prefiero el riesgo de la creencia a rebajar el orden del fraseo. Aquí no se busca apelar a la conciencia, pero soy consciente, y de regreso al cauce, a la supuesta complicación de estos verbos, que si son enreverados, que si no son para el pueblo, bien habría que redefinir el concepto, ya que pueblo es un error fatuo que no se deja sugerir. Esta manera de decirte nace desde una precariedad madura de hambres y sustancias de antes. Si esa gota se sublevara, loca en los pentagramas, en la tinta del cementerio, trazando el camino ansiado, y tu sonrisa cada mañana y alfombras de clavo y canela. Si sobráramos de pausa tu maltrato, si no tiemblo y no cierro los ojos cuando me das la mano, si tu mordida de paz, si te abrazo hermana, si te beso hermano, si esa gota me sublevara, si esa sangre me sublevara, si tu cuerpo me sublevara.
Bufandas. Una anciana dormida en el tren, envuelta en áurea bufanda como yema de huevo. Una anciana como plato de natilla, salvo pelo de tan rubio, invisibles cejas de tan albas. Una anciana como postre genuino, como escupitajo de un sol meridiano, somnolienta y atónita que no cambia de color al salir del túnel. Una vieja leona que se estea en su roca, y al otro lado del pasillo, una joven envuelta en bufanda naranja como una rebanada de mamey, una joven que lee papeles a mordidas arropada en un espeso abrigo, su cuello mamey cercenado, sus mejillas rosadas y sus lentes marrones, y el mamey deslizándose por la hoja blanca como un sensual comentario, como una mordida en la nuca de león que la monta y la cubre entre los jirones naranja del ocaso, y más lejos, una seria mujer de bufanda magenta, una seria mujer cual licuado de bayas que lee muy seria un libro y reprueba con magenta mirada, y se traga su hambre y se come su saya magenta, entre negros abrigos y grises paraguas, pero atisba de reojo la procesión de audaces bufandas, y a cada lado, imparables serpientes, reptantes de luces rojas, de luces de oro y plata, más veloces que este gris tren de incontables bufandas, y yo, gris y negro, y yo mordido a trozos, escupido semilla a semilla, regurgitado sobre mi negra libreta, y yo bocado de leonas de sabana, y yo tan cercano a casa y tan lejos de la blanca ventisca, y yo en general, pardo y ocioso, perdido tras mi negra mirada.
Tell me more about some of the other local events that are going to be taking place. I know there's an open mic that's going to be happening.
Yes, we want the participation of the community in the festival. So the night that we are, or the Centro, la Casa de Cultura, Calles y Sueños in Pilsen, we will present, the Cuban poets will again perform. That would be the first part of the evening. But we'll also have music by Tonatiuh de la Cruz. But the second part of the evening will be all open mic. So The audience will be able to participate. They can bring their own poetry. They can bring poetry from others that they love and want to have on the mic. And so we will be able to listen to what we don't yet know about people who are writing poetry and are loving poetry, want to share it with us and the festival. We'll also have on the 30th a panel on literary translation. And at that panel, people that have worked with the festival translating poetry for a special book we're giving some of the poets will talk about that process. And at that time, we'll also talk about that question that we have about English and Spanish,
wow,
and how much one
that's a
is
huge
the other.
question, right?
Yes, so it should be very interesting. And that would be at the Latino Cultural Center at UIC, Ravel Cintrón Ortiz.
Wonderful. And that's something that I've thought about and have asked myself. This is a celebration of Spanish poetry, but in this community there's a lot of code mixing, so
Yes.
I wonder how that panel will go, but I'll definitely have to make it to it.
Definitely, yes, it's wonderful.
Tell me now about these two poets that will be honored as part of this poetry celebration, these visiting poets that will be honored, and who they are, where they're from, and what their poetry has been about. Gerardo, please.
Coral Bracho is from Mexico. I think she is, at this point in her career, one of the most recognized poets, Mexican poets, in her generation. Juan Carlos Mestres from Spain. They're at that point in their careers where they have achieved great recognition among readers and among other poets, what we call poetas con trayectoria, poets with a trajectory, with a great track record in terms of publication, in terms of awards,
Right.
in terms of the work that they have done. So they are they were carefully chosen as we were planning this with our partners at DePaul University. We were certainly looking for poets who could greatly enhance the whole scope of the festival. So I think that anybody who's familiar with their poetry will agree that they have made tremendous contributions to Spanish language poetry. They have been translated, which is, we were talking about
Right.
translation.
Right.
I think it's a great merit for an author when their work is finally translated. So we're very excited, very, very proud of the fact that we will both have them. We'll have them both here in Chicago.
Santoro, do you have anything to add to that about Juan Carlos Mestre and perhaps why we're celebrating him?
Well, one of the wonderful things about Juan Carlos Mestre is not just his work as a poet, but also as a visual artist. He's a very well-known visual artist in Spain and really all of Europe, and has a very unique take on visual poetry, which is part of what we do at the festival. We have 3 competitions. Actually, one is video poetry, and you can get that information on our website, contratiempo.net. One is for original poetry, meaning the poetry that you write yourself. We give a prize to the best poetry. That is just anybody can participate. And finally, we have a declamación. So it's a recitation contest, and members of the community come that maybe have a poem that they've loved since childhood, that their mother or their father told them when they were little, and they loved it forever, or they learned it in
Right.
college, and they want to present it, to recite it. So then they get judged on the recitation of the poem. So really, there's room for everyone.
That's one of the wonderful parts of this festival, is that it's so open. Yes, and I think it shows that poetry belongs to everyone, right?
I agree.
Ray, what would you recommend that we read or we prepare before we go to the festival?
Well, I wouldn't actually recommend to read anything before, like just to open your senses to what is going to happen. My preference would be the the Puerto Rican event, like for the food. So yeah, so I'll be get ready for that one. Also, you know, there is a great Puerto Rican poet I just comment is Mara Pastor. So she's a very well-known poet, Puerto Rican poet. So if you can give yourself a chance, you know, to pass by there, and there's a lot of Puerto Ricans in this community too. So I think that afternoon is going to be very interesting.
What about her poetry is what attracts you?
I think it's I lived in Puerto Rico for a long time. That's when I went to school for. So I love the strength of the Puerto Rican woman. So I think there's something very subtle, very sensual, but at the same time very strong in terms of the language and independence in the Puerto Rican literature. I would like to say Puerto Rican literature, not to say Puerto Rican literature written for women and all that, because I think that goes beyond that. If you look things through your senses, if you perceive things through your senses, things go beyond gender, and that's what we're trying to pursue here, you know.
Wow, that's a great great recommendation. Now, one final question. We're running out of time. What would you recommend to local poets if they want to get their poetry published or they want to recite their poetry when it's not the poetry festival? I know this is a once a year celebration. However, what happens during the year that you would recommend or invite them to?
Well, I think that the best conduit for that is to come to a literary workshop. We've been doing this for years. We meet every other Sunday in our offices in Pilsen, and they can go on our website, contratiempo.net, to find the information. They can email me at gcardenas@contratiempo.net, send us submissions. The best way is to come to the workshop, and with a regular frequency, we publish a selection of the best work from the workshop in the magazine, and we've been doing this for many years, and this is how we find our local poets.
Okay. Are there other organizations that you would recommend as well?
Yeah, for example, the people from the Literary Guild, they have something that is called Palabra Pura, and there's a special Wednesday of the month, I think it's at the beginning of the month, that they get together in Humboldt Park in one restaurant there. It's very nice. There you can have not only English and Spanish, people in other languages, you know, Polish and all that, they go there and they read their poetry, and then you have the mix, because first they have an open mic and then they have featured poets. So I've seen people, like for example from the workshop in Contratiempo, that they go there to try out what they worked at the workshop, you know.
That's awesome. It sounds like we have a great culture of poetry in this city. Thank you so much for coming and being my guests on this show. Gerardo, Moira, Rey, thank you so much.
No, my pleasure.
I would like to thank all my guests for joining us. Perspectivas Latinas is a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit organization would like to use CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Tune in to Perspectivas Latinas for local issues and concerns every Thursday at 8:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. I'm Juan Carlos Hernandez. Thank you for joining us.